Hey everyone, Chris here. Welcome to day 2 of Yoga for Resilience. Today we are going to look at breathing, and we're going to start off nice and simple with some abdominal breathing, and it's simple but super important. So we'll go through all of that. So find somewhere comfortable to sit. We are going to be here for a while, so do take a moment to really get comfortable here. I'm going to be cross-legged. If something else works for you, then that's fine. Like, you could sit on a chair. Nice firm back is a good one because we do want to be alert and awake. You could prop something up underneath you, some bolsters, cushions, blocks, whatever it needs. Anything you find around the house. Like, you don't need a bunch of fancy stuff. Just get a load of jumpers and make a pile out of those. Those will be fine. Whatever you need to be comfortable. In a nice seated position. You could do it standing also if you've got nothing else, but it tends to be uncomfortable to stand for quite a while. It's not going to be a super long class, but there we go. And we're really going to focus on this abdominal breathing or belly breathing today. So we'll get started, and then I'll say a bunch of stuff about it while we're getting on with the practice. So let's try and find a nice tall spine here. Very easy to kind of slump forward. So we want to deliberately bring some attention to not holding ourselves up super tense, but not going into that slouch either. And then we're just going to start by taking some nice deep breaths. And for today's class, that's basically all we're going to do. And I'm going to tell you why it's important. But just taking those nice deep breaths. You might want to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. You might want to do it all through your nose, all through your mouth, whatever works for you. Classically, in through the nose and out through the mouth works well, but not everyone can breathe in the same way. Some of us have colds, blocked noses, whatever it is. So whatever works for you is fine. And we want to take these breaths nice and slow, so it can be good to count to 4. So in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, out, in, out, in, out. So keep going like this. Find a pace that works for you, and while we do this, I'll talk a bit about why breathing is so important. And it sounds kind of silly in a way, I think, when you first start learning about this stuff, because of course breathing is something we do all day, every day, forever. If we ever stop breathing, we die pretty quick. So the body is doing it automatically. But a lot of times we're doing quite lazy breathing, and that's fine because we don't need to do good quality breathing most of the time. So what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of our breathing is quite shallow, and so when we're just taking little regular breaths, so not panting, but just our everyday breaths that we walk around with, we're only exchanging some of the oxygen in our lungs for fresh oxygen. So if our lungs can hold a couple of liters, we might only be doing a small percentage of that in our regular breathing, and we're leaving a lot of the air still in the lungs. And when we really start deep breathing, then we get a much bigger exchange of gases, so sending the air that's now full of carbon dioxide out of our breath and taking more oxygen rich air into our lungs. Now that's really useful when we want to make sure that we get plenty of oxygen in there. So if you think about when you're exercising, when you're running, you're at the gym or whatever it is, what you're doing is probably taking these really big breaths, right? And the reason that we take those big breaths is that we need oxygen for energy, we need oxygen to do sport, to do exercise, and so we need to get as much oxygen as possible, and the way we do that is we send all of the carbon dioxide air out of our lungs and take some nice fresh oxygen in. We don't need to do that most of our lives because we're not exerting huge amounts of force. But when we're exercising, that's when we start taking these really deep breaths. And of course, they're fast. You're probably panting when you're exercising, but they're also big, deep breaths. You can really feel your lungs inflating and deflating. You can also close your eyes as we continue with these long breaths. If that works for you, I'll tell you if I'm doing anything that you need to look out for, but I don't think I will be in this class. So how do you know if you are doing abdominal breathing? Well, one thing you can do, which again is something you might want to watch me, but I'm sure you can do this anyway, is just bringing your hand to your belly. I'm sure you know where your hand is and where your belly is, if you have both of those things, and you can just feel it. Like normally it's just your chest moving, but when we're taking these nice deep breaths, we can really feel the belly moving. Of course, the belly itself isn't involved in the breathing, but as we expand and contract our lungs, pushes everything else around, and we can feel it through the belly. So if we're doing that belly breathing, probably a good sign that we're taking good abdominal breaths. So why would we want to do this deep breathing? Well, it's really useful in regulating how we're feeling, regulating our emotions. So if we think about the nervous system inside our body, we have the sympathetic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight response. When we're feeling anxious, our SNS kicks in, sends the body into that fight or flight mode, gets us ready to fight or run away, gets us into a high stress position. Now the parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. So this is our rest and digest system, and this is the thing that calms us down. And because our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all connected, modifying one thing can affect all the others. So if we are in a high stress situation where we're feeling overwhelmed, where we need some resilience, then we can use the breath to regulate our nervous system. Now, one way would be to keep breathing really quickly. If we wanted to get into a fight or flight, rapid breathing can be really useful. But of course, most of the time in modern life, it's because we're stressed out and we need to down-regulate our nervous system. And in that case, that's where we want to start these slow, deep breaths, because that will activate our parasympathetic nervous system, and it will bring in our rest and digest. It will bring our stress levels down. And so we can use the breath as a tool to regulate our nervous system. We can regulate it up and we can regulate it down. But of course, typically we're trying to down regulate in stressful situations, and that's where these deep breaths come in really useful. So we teach breathing a lot in therapy, in things like we do it in mindfulness, but also cognitive behavioral therapy, really popular just exercise if you've done therapy, but also outside in just an everyday mindfulness practice, in just everyday life. Really useful to practice some deep breathing, because if you only try and practice it when you're in a stressful situation, you're probably going to feel overwhelmed. Even though it's a really simple thing like taking some deep breaths, it's really hard to use in the moment when you're feeling overwhelmed. So by regularly practicing some deep breathing, then we can bring it when we need it, when we get into that stress situation, when we need to just take a breath, we need to bring some resilience to the situation. If we're practiced in taking these breaths, that can be really useful, because we have that skill, it's ingrained, it's automatic. We can just go, okay, let's take some deep breaths. It comes very naturally, and we can down regulate our emotions. So I've given you quite a lot of information there, so let's look at the key points here. So we can use the breath as a tool to regulate, and especially in stressful situations, down regulate our emotional reaction to things. Deep breathing is the way to down regulate it, and we want to use this abdominal breathing, so being able to feel it in the belly will show us that we're really getting those deep breaths that we need.